I'm a taxi driver who survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion, and this is my story. Before I begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. It was 5:37 a.m. when it happened. I'd been driving since midnight, a double shift to cover my buddy Omar's hours while he visited his mother in the hospital. The pre-dawn streets of Providence were nearly empty, just a few delivery trucks, early risers heading to opening shifts, and the occasional insomniac catching a ride home after a night that lasted too long. I was cruising down Benefit Street when every electronic device in my taxi went haywire at once. The dispatch radio screamed static, my GPS flashed and died, and the dashboard lights flickered like a 70s disco. Even my phone, sitting in its mount on the air vent, went black before rebooting to a screen I'd never seen before. My name is Dexter Harding, 15 years behind the wheel of a taxi in Providence, Rhode Island. Divorced, one kid in college I can barely afford, and more stories about this city than anyone cares to hear. That morning, I was about to become part of the biggest story this city, hell, this world, would ever tell. I pulled over, thinking I'd blown a fuse or something. The street lamps were still on, so it wasn't a general power outage. As I was checking under the dash, a vibration shook the car. Not like an earthquake, I'd felt those before, but something rhythmic, almost like giant footsteps. The coffee in my travel mug rippled with each pulse. That's when my fare, a college professor type I'd picked up from the train station, tapped on the divider. "Mr. Driver, I believe we should move immediately." His voice was calm but tight with tension. I glanced up, ready to tell him I was fixing something, when I saw his face. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring up through the windshield, his face drained of color. I followed his gaze upward and felt my stomach drop. The sky was wrong. Where there should have been the first hints of dawn breaking over the eastern horizon, there was instead a massive shape blotting out the stars. Not a cloud, not a plane, something enormous and solid, with geometric patterns of lights along its underside that definitely weren't stars. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer on some primal level. We all know the shape of that fear, don't we? We've seen it in movies our whole lives. "Extraterrestrial," the professor said simply. "And judging by the electromagnetic disruption and gravitational anomalies, I'd say it's not a reconnaissance craft." I tore my eyes away from the ship and stared at him. "Who exactly are you?" "Dr. Elias Wright, Astrophysics, Brown University." He extended his hand as casually as if we were meeting at a department mixer. "I specialize in theoretical propulsion systems for deep space travel. And that," he pointed upward, "is using technology centuries beyond our own." I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered but caught. "Where to then, Doc? Because sitting under that thing seems like a bad idea." He nodded briskly. "My laboratory. We have equipment there that might help us understand what we're dealing with." That's when the street lamps went out all at once, plunging the street into darkness broken only by my headlights and the ethereal glow from above. "Too late," Wright murmured. A beam of intense blue-white light shot down from the craft, striking somewhere in the downtown area, maybe half a mile away. It held steady for about 10 seconds, then winked out. The sudden silence was somehow worse than any explosion. "Drive," Wright said. Now, I didn't need to be told twice. I floored it, tires squealing as we tore down the empty street. In my rearview mirror, I saw more beams stabbing down across the city. 3, then 5, then too many to count. "What are they doing?" I asked, voice tight as I took a corner too fast. "If it follows established invasion protocols." "Established what?" "Theoretical invasion strategies," he corrected. "They're likely establishing control points at key infrastructure locations. Power plants, communications hubs, transportation centers, government facilities." "This isn't a movie, Doc," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I saw something that made me swallow them back. A second craft had appeared over the harbor, smaller than the first but still massive, its hull reflecting the city lights as it descended. As we watched, a section of its underside opened, and something emerged, not a beam this time, but objects. Dozens of them, falling in formation toward the ground. "Landing craft," Wright said quietly. "The second wave." My radio crackled to life suddenly, making us both jump. Through bursts of static, I could hear the dispatcher's voice, higher pitched than normal, with barely controlled panic. "All units, emergency protocol. Return to base immediately. Repeat, all units return to base now." I grabbed the handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. What's happening? Over." The reply was fragmented. "Federal alert, unknown aircraft, martial law, return to..." Then silence, followed by a new voice, artificial, with no inflection. "Human communication networks are now under central coordination. Remain in your current locations. Assessment teams will reach you shortly." Wright reached over and snatched the radio from my hand, turning it off. "They've compromised the communications infrastructure already. Remarkable efficiency." "They? You mean?" "Yes, Mr. Harding. We are being invaded." I almost asked how he knew my name before remembering my license was displayed on the dash. My brain was struggling to process what was happening, grabbing at small details as if understanding them would somehow make the impossible events around us make sense. "If they've taken over communications, they'll have transportation networks next," Wright continued, thinking aloud. "Automated traffic systems, air traffic control, railways." "My taxi isn't exactly connected to any networks," I pointed out, still driving toward the university area on autopilot. "Old habits." "An advantage," he nodded, "though they'll likely establish physical checkpoints soon." As if manifesting his prediction, we rounded a corner and came face to face with our first alien. At least, I assumed it was an alien. It stood in the middle of the intersection, at least 7 feet tall. The body was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in subtle, nauseating ways, joints that bent at odd angles, proportions that didn't quite match human anatomy. It was encased in what looked like segmented armor that shifted colors subtly, blending with its surroundings. Where a face should have been was a smooth, reflective surface that reminded me of a motorcycle helmet visor, but wrapped completely around what I guessed was its head. I slammed on the brakes, the taxi sliding to a stop about 30 feet from the creature. It turned toward us with an unnervingly fluid motion, that featureless face regarding us impassively. "Reverse," Wright said quietly. Slowly. My hands shook as I shifted gears. Before I could back up, the alien raised what looked like an arm, pointing something at us. "Down," Wright shouted, pulling me sideways just as the windshield exploded inward. It wasn't a bullet. The glass didn't shatter so much as disintegrate, turning from solid to dust in an instant. I hit the gas instinctively, ducking below the dash as the taxi surged forward. There was a thump and a strange, high-pitched sound, not quite a scream, more like metal under extreme stress, as we hit the alien. I straightened up just enough to see over the dashboard, driving blind through a shower of glass fragments. We were past the intersection, the alien nowhere in sight. Did we kill it?" I gasped, heart hammering against my ribs. Wright was brushing glass from his coat, a small cut on his cheek, trickling blood. "Unlikely. That armor appeared to be highly advanced composite material. But we may have bought ourselves some time." I glanced in the side mirror and immediately wished I hadn't. The alien was rising to its feet in the middle of the street, movements jerky but rapidly smoothing out, as if it were healing or recalibrating itself. It turned our way, and even from this distance, I felt a chill of pure animal fear run down my spine. "Don't stop driving," Wright advised. I didn't. We made it another half-mile before I had to slow down. The streets were becoming clogged with abandoned cars, and people were starting to emerge from buildings, confused and frightened. The sun was rising now, illuminating the city in the early stages of panic. "We need to get off the main streets," I said, turning into an alley I knew would connect to a service road behind some restaurants. 15 years of navigating the city was paying off in ways I'd never anticipated. Agreed. They'll be establishing control of major thoroughfares first. Side streets, maintenance roads, and pedestrian paths will be lower priorities. As we emerged from the alley, A woman with 2 small children flagged us down desperately. Against my better judgment, I slowed. "Please," she called through my missing windshield. "My husband was at the hospital for night shift. The phones aren't working. We need to get somewhere safe." I looked at Wright, who hesitated only briefly before nodding. The more information sources we have, the better we can understand what we're facing. I popped the locks. "Get in quick." The woman hustled her kids into the back seat, a boy about 7 and a girl who couldn't have been more than 4. They were both wide-eyed with fear, but eerily quiet. "I'm Maria Diaz," the woman said as she closed the door. "These are my children, Lucas and Sophie. Thank you for stopping." "We're safe?" I asked, already pulling away. Because from what we've seen, the answer might be nowhere. "My sister has a place in Foster," she replied. "Rural, mostly off-grid. It's about a 40-minute drive west." I nodded. Rural sounded good. Away from the city, away from the alien ships, and whatever those beams had been doing. But I still had Wright with his lab equipment that might actually help make sense of all this. "We'll head toward Brown first," I decided. "Drop off the professor, grab whatever he needs, then get you folks out of the city." Wright started to protest, but a series of explosions from downtown silenced him. We all turned to look as plumes of smoke began rising over the skyline. "The secondary power plant," Maria said quietly. "My husband said they were running stress tests this week." "Not tests anymore," I muttered, accelerating as much as the increasingly crowded streets would allow. People were pouring out of apartment buildings now, some dressed, others still in pajamas or night clothes. Most were on foot, carrying whatever they could grab quickly. Others were trying to start cars that wouldn't respond. The newer models with all their smart technology and wireless connections. My old Crown Victoria taxi, with its minimal electronics and manual overrides, was suddenly the most advanced technology that still reliably worked. "They're targeting our infrastructure," Wright explained, watching the chaos unfold around us. "But selectively. Notice the traffic lights are still functioning, but in an unusual pattern." He was right. Instead of the normal red-yellow-green cycle, they were blinking in complex sequences, almost like code. "They're using our own systems to hurt people," he continued, directing civilian movement toward collection points. "Collection points?" Maria's voice rose sharply. "What do you mean?" Wright turned to face her, his academic detachment slipping for the first time. "I don't know. But given their technological superiority, if their intent was simple extermination, we'd likely all be dead already. They want something else." The little girl in the back seat began to cry softly. Maria pulled her closer, murmuring comfort in Spanish. "Maybe save the speculation for when there aren't kids present, Doc," I suggested, taking a sharp turn to avoid a growing crowd at an intersection. We were getting close to the university when we encountered our second alien, or rather aliens. 3 of them stood in formation blocking Thayer Street, the main approach to Brown Science buildings. Unlike the first one we'd seen, these were accompanied by what looked like floating mechanical platforms, each about the size of a pool table, hovering silently about 3 feet off the ground. I hit the brakes and prepared to reverse, but Wright put a hand on my arm. "Wait," he said, eyes fixed on the scene ahead. "Look at what they're doing." The aliens were stopping pedestrians, directing them to stand on the platforms with simple, unmistakable gestures. Once on the platforms, people seemed to freeze in place, still conscious, but unable to move. When each platform held 4 humans, it would float away toward the downtown area, and another would take its place. "Processing," Wright whispered, "cataloging and sorting the population." "Into what categories?" I asked, already turning the car around. "Unknown. But those aren't being harmed, just collected." "I don't want to be collected," Lucas spoke up from the back seat, his first words since entering the car. "You won't be," I promised, accelerating down a narrow one-way street in the wrong direction. "We're going another way." Wright pulled out a small notebook and began sketching what we'd seen, making notes in abbreviated scientific language I couldn't follow. The professor was scared. I could see it in the tightness around his eyes, but his analytical mind was still working, still trying to understand. "We need to adapt our plan," he said after a moment. My laboratory is clearly inaccessible, and given what we've seen, remaining in the city limits is increasingly dangerous. Foster it is, then, I decided, heading for the western edge of the city. Your sister's place, I added to Maria, who nodded gratefully. But first, we need supplies, Wright interjected. Food, water, medical necessities. And I need electronic components, specifically signal processing equipment and radiation detection devices. Why radiation detection? Maria asked sharply. Precautionary only, Wright assured her. These craft must have propulsion systems, and understanding their emissions could provide crucial information. I thought about where to find these things. There's a Radio Shack that went out of business on Atwells Avenue. Got taken over by one of those survival prepper stores. They might have both regular supplies and whatever electronic stuff you need. Perfect, Wright nodded. And it's on our way out of the city. As we drove, the situation around us deteriorated rapidly. More beams from the mothership stabbed down at regular intervals, each followed by localized power outages. Smaller craft, similar to the one we'd seen over the harbor, appeared at strategic locations throughout the city. From each, dozens of the tall alien figures emerged, spreading out with clear purpose and coordination. They're securing a perimeter, Wright observed as we passed an alien squad establishing what looked like a checkpoint on a bridge, cutting off escape routes systematically. Then we'd better get through before they close the net, I said, taking a detour through a public park to avoid the main roads. The taxi bounced and jolted over the grass, drawing stares from the few joggers who were somehow maintaining their morning routines despite literal aliens in the sky. Providence was transforming before our eyes. In some areas, life seemed to continue almost normally, people walking dogs, opening shops, seemingly oblivious to the invasion. In others, chaos reigned, looting, abandoned vehicles, people running in panic. And in a growing number of sections, an eerie new order was being established under alien supervision, with humans lining up in silent, orderly queues for processing. By the time we reached the survival store, it was just past 7:30 a.m. The city had been under alien influence for less than 2 hours, but it felt like days had passed. The store was still open, surprisingly. The owner, a burly man with a tactical vest and a bushy beard, stood guard at the entrance with what looked like a modified shotgun. A line of people waited outside, being admitted 2 at a time. This is going to be complicated, I said, pulling into an alley beside the building. Everyone's going to want supplies. I'll go, Wright volunteered. I know exactly what we need, both general supplies and the specific electronics. I should come too, I said. Help carry things, watch your back. Maria looked uncertain. What about us? Lock the doors, I instructed. Stay down. If anything happens, anything at all, honk 3 times, then drive away. Don't wait for us. I handed her my keys, a gesture of trust that felt monumental under the circumstances. She took them with a solemn nod. 15 minutes, I told Wright. In and out. We joined the line, trying to look calm despite the apocalypse unfolding around us. The people ahead of us were surprisingly orderly, though the tension was palpable. Many were checking phones that didn't work or staring at the alien craft now clearly visible in the morning sky. Do you think they can be reasoned with? I asked Wright quietly. He considered this seriously. All evidence suggests they possess advanced intelligence. Intelligence typically correlates with communication capability. Whether they would see value in communicating with us is another question entirely. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. It was accurate. When we reached the front of the line, the owner looked us over suspiciously. 1 person per group, he growled. Wright stepped forward. I'm a professor of astrophysics at Brown. I may be able to help understand what we're facing, but I need specific equipment. The man's expression changed subtly. Inside. Both of you. Quick. Once through the door, I saw why he'd made an exception. The store was only half survival gear. The back section, hidden from street view, was filled with ham radio equipment, satellite dishes, and other communication devices. A small group of people huddled around what looked like a military-grade radio set. You really from Brown? The owner asked Wright. Yes, theoretical astrophysics and propulsion systems. The owner grunted. Name's Garrett. We've been trying to establish contact with anyone who might know what the hell is happening. Got through briefly to someone claiming to be Coast Guard before the frequency was jammed. Wright moved immediately to the radio setup, examining it with practiced eyes. May I? While he worked with the communications group, I gathered supplies, water purification tablets, energy bars, first aid kit, flashlights, batteries. Basic survival gear for 5 people on the move. Any luck? I asked, returning to Wright's side with a full duffel bag. He shook his head. All standard frequencies are either jammed or broadcasting automated messages in an unknown language. But I've modified this unit to search for quantum fluctuations in the EM band. Which means I might be able to listen in on their communications. As if on cue, the radio emitted a series of sounds unlike anything I'd ever heard, clicks, whirs, and tones that seemed to modulate at frequencies that made my teeth hurt. That's them, one of the radio operators whispered. Wright adjusted some settings, his face intent. The pattern is complex but structured. Definitely language, not just signals. A loud bang from outside made us all jump. Through the windows, I saw something arc across the sky, a missile or artillery shell, before detonating above a cluster of the alien landing craft. The explosion was bright enough to leave spots in my vision. Military's fighting back, Garrett said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. Wright looked less encouraged. We should go. Now. We grabbed our supplies and hurried out the back door just as the response came. Not from the landing craft that had been targeted, but from the mothership above. A beam, different from the others, red instead of blue, lanced down with terrible precision. The strike point was hidden by buildings, but the shock wave wasn't. It rolled through the city like a physical wall, shattering windows and setting off car alarms that still functioned. That was Artillery Hill, Garrett said, voice hollow. National Guard headquarters. I broke into a run, Wright following close behind. When we reached the alley, the taxi was gone. She left, I said, a mix of disappointment and hope in my voice. Disappointment that we were now stranded. Hope that Maria and her children had escaped whatever was coming. Then I heard it, 3 short honks from around the corner. We sprinted toward the sound to find the taxi idling in a loading zone. Maria at the wheel, her face tight with fear. We have to go now, she said as we piled in. They're coming this way. I took over driving as Wright distributed supplies from the duffel. Through the windshield, we could see black smoke rising from the direction of the artillery strike. The alien response had been swift, overwhelming, and precisely targeted. Did you get what you needed? I asked Wright as we pulled away from the curb. He nodded, patting a small case of electronic components. Enough to build a basic detection system. Yes. For what purpose? Maria asked, helping her children with water bottles. 2 possibilities, Wright replied. 1, to detect approaching alien craft or individuals before we can see them. 2, to potentially interpret their communications. You think you can talk to them? I asked incredulously. Not exactly. But understanding their coordination might help us predict their movements. As we navigated the increasingly complex maze of roadblocks, abandoned vehicles, and alien checkpoints, Wright worked in the passenger seat, connecting components with the practiced hands of someone who'd built experimental devices his entire career. We were making good progress toward the western edge of the city when we hit our first major obstacle, a complete roadblock on Route 6, the main artery leading out toward Foster. Not a traffic jam or accident, but an actual wall of materialized energy, shimmering like heat waves above asphalt, but solid enough that cars bounced off it when they made contact. They've sealed the city, Wright observed, looking up from his makeshift device. I reversed quickly, taking us down a side street before any alien patrols noticed us. There has to be another way out. Wright's device chirped suddenly, a series of lights blinking on its jury-rig display. Interesting, he murmured. The barrier isn't continuous. It's projections from nodes placed approximately half a mile apart. Between those nodes, there are gaps in the quantum field. In English document, there are holes in their fence. Small ones, but they exist. Can you find one? He nodded, adjusting something on his device. Follow my directions precisely. What followed was a tense game of technological hide-and-seek. Wright's device would detect fluctuations in whatever energy field the aliens were using, and I would navigate through increasingly narrow and obscure routes, access roads, maintenance paths for the railway, even a dry stream bed at one point. The taxi's suspension wouldn't thank me, but it held. Throughout our escape attempt, we could see the invasion progressing with terrifying efficiency. The smaller craft were now establishing what looked like forward operating bases at key locations: the central power station, water treatment plant, major intersections. At each, the floating platforms continued to collect humans, who were then sorted into different groups based on criteria we couldn't discern. We passed close enough to one collection point to see what happened next. Some groups were loaded onto larger transport platforms, presumably to be taken to the mothership. Others were directed to work details, already beginning to construct strange, angular structures of unknown purpose. A third group was simply held in a containment field, neither transported nor put to work. Why 3 groups? Maria wondered, keeping her children's eyes averted from the scene. Classification, Wright suggested. Perhaps by usefulness, resistance potential, or biological factors. Without understanding their objectives, it's impossible to know their categorization criteria. It was approaching noon, over 6 hours since the first ship appeared, when Wright's device led us to what he claimed was a gap in the perimeter barrier. To me, it looked like an unassuming stretch of Forest Service road, blocked by the same shimmering energy field we'd seen elsewhere. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, eyeing the barrier skeptically. "The quantum fluctuation pattern indicates a periodic decoherence in the field stabilization," he replied, which told me absolutely nothing useful. "He means yes," Maria translated, surprising me. When I glanced back at her, she shrugged. "I was an engineering student before the kids. I speak some physicist." "The field destabilizes for approximately 7.3 seconds every 3 minutes, Wright continued. "If we time it correctly, we can pass through during that window." "And if we time it wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "Based on the molecular disruption patterns observed when floating debris contacts the field, I wouldn't recommend it." Great. We had one chance, and failure meant being reduced to floating debris ourselves. Wright synchronized his watch, calculating the next window. Mark in 42 seconds. I positioned the taxi about 50 yards from the barrier, engine revving. Maria held her children close in the back seat, whispering what sounded like a prayer. 20 seconds, Wright counted down. 15, 10. I wiped sweaty palms on my jeans, foot heavy on the brake, ready to transfer to the accelerator. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now. I floored it. The taxi leaped forward, tires spinning on the dirt road before finding purchase. We accelerated toward what looked like a solid wall of shimmering death. Behind me, Sophie screamed. Lucas covered his eyes. Maria kept hers wide open, unflinching. Wright watched his device intently. Almost. Now. We're in the window. I couldn't see any change in the barrier as we hurtled toward it at nearly 60 miles per hour. For a terrible moment, I was certain we'd miscalculated, that we were about to be disintegrated or worse. Then we were through, the taxi skidding slightly as I instinctively hit the brakes on the other side. The barrier looked identical from this angle. No visible hole, no opening, just the same shimmering wall. "We made it," I breathed, hands shaking on the wheel. Wright checked his device. "Keep moving. They'll detect the breach momentarily." I didn't need to be told twice. We continued down the forest road, away from Providence, away from the ships and the aliens and the organized collection of humanity. The further we got from the city, the more the knot in my chest began to loosen. After about 20 minutes of driving through increasingly rural terrain, we found ourselves on a two-lane country road that Maria recognized. "Left here," she directed. "My sister's place is about 5 miles up this road, then down a private drive." As we turned, Wright's device began chirping urgently. He studied it with growing concern. "What is it?" I asked, not slowing. "Aircraft. Moving rapidly in this direction." We all looked up through the still missing windshield. Nothing was visible except blue sky and scattered clouds. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. Wright nodded grimly. "The quantum displacement field is unmistakable. Similar signature to the smaller craft we observed in the city, but moving much faster. Pursuit craft, I guess." "How long do we have?" He checked his readings. "At their current velocity, 3 minutes, perhaps 4. I pushed the taxi harder, the engine protesting as we took the winding country road at dangerous speeds. Trees and fields blurred past. In the back seat, Maria held her children tightly as we swerved around curves. "There," she pointed suddenly. "That gravel drive between the maple trees." I made the turn so sharply the taxi nearly went up on 2 wheels. The gravel crunched beneath our tires as we sped down a long, tree-lined drive that eventually opened onto a clearing. A rustic cabin sat nestled against the forest edge, solar panels visible on the southern-facing roof, a large garden to one side. No cars were visible, no signs of life. "My sister and her husband are away at a convention in Montreal," Maria explained as we pulled up to the cabin. "They were due back tomorrow." We piled out of the taxi, Wright still watching his device anxiously. 1 minute, maybe less. Maria found the spare key under a flower pot and quickly ushered her children inside. Wright and I grabbed our supplies and followed, the professor pausing at the threshold to scan the sky. "We need to make this structure undetectable," he said urgently. "The pursuit craft will have scanning technology far beyond our comprehension." "The root cellar," Maria suggested. "My sister uses it for food storage, but it's essentially a bunker. Concrete walls reinforced with steel, originally built as a bomb shelter during the Cold War." We hurried to follow her through the cabin to a heavy door in the kitchen floor. Below was a surprisingly spacious chamber stocked with preserved foods, water jugs, and emergency supplies. Clearly, Maria's sister shared some of the same preparedness mindset as the store owner in Providence. "Everyone in," I urged, helping Lucas down the steep steps. "Quickly." Wright was the last to enter, still monitoring his device. "They're directly overhead," he whispered, pulling the cellar door closed above us. In the dim light of our flashlights, we waited in tense silence. At first, I heard nothing. Then, gradually, a high-pitched whine became audible, growing in intensity until it was painful to the ears. The sound moved across the ceiling, paused, then continued in what seemed like a search pattern. The children clung to their mother, eyes wide with fear. Wright continued watching his device, which he'd modified to operate with minimal power signature. I found myself holding my breath, as if even that might somehow give away our position. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the sound began to recede. Wright waited until his device showed all clear before finally relaxing slightly. "They've moved on," he confirmed. "Either they lost our trail or they're expanding their search perimeter." "What now?" Maria asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between all of us. What now, indeed? We'd escaped the immediate danger, found temporary shelter, but the world was still in the midst of an alien invasion. Providence, possibly all major cities, was under their control. Communications were down. The military response had been swiftly neutralized. And we were 5 people in a root cellar, one of us still just a preschooler. "We gather information," Wright said firmly. "We observe, we analyze, we understand. Knowledge is our only true advantage." "Knowledge for what purpose?" I asked. "We can't fight them. You saw what they did to that artillery position." "Not to fight, to survive." He gestured around us. "This is just the beginning, the first day of something that may last years. The more we understand about their methods, technology, and objectives, the better our chances of long-term survival." Maria nodded slowly. "And maybe finding others. There must be more people who escaped, who are hiding." "Resistance," Lucas whispered, the word carrying a weight beyond his years. Wright smiled gently at the boy. "First survival, then understanding. Resistance comes only with knowledge." We spent the rest of the afternoon organizing our supplies, setting up Wright's equipment to passively monitor alien communications. and taking inventory of the root cellar's resources. Maria's sister and her husband were clearly long-term preppers. The space was stocked for months of self-sufficiency, including water filtration, emergency power, and even educational materials for children. By evening, we had established a tenuous sense of security. We allowed ourselves brief, carefully timed trips upstairs to use the bathroom and check the surroundings. The house remained undisturbed, the aliens apparently convinced that this area was clear. It was during one such trip, around 5:30 p.m., that I saw it, a column of smoke rising from the direction of Providence, massive enough to be visible even at this distance. Through a pair of binoculars we'd found in the cabin, I could make out the mothership hovering lower now, directly over downtown, smaller craft circling it like satellites. Wright joined me at the window, his face grim as he observed the distant scene. "They're establishing a permanent presence," he said quietly, "converting the city's infrastructure to their needs." "And the people?" He didn't answer immediately. "That depends on what they want from us. Labor, research subjects, perhaps biological resources." I thought about the three groups we'd seen at the collection point. Which would I have been sorted into? Which would Maria and her children? Which would the professor himself? "You know," I said after a long silence, "I've been driving that taxi for 15 years. Thought I knew every inch of Providence. All its secrets, all its stories." I gestured toward the distant smoke. "Turns out I didn't know anything at all." "Few of us did," Wright replied. "Human civilization has operated under the illusion of cosmic solitude for too long. Perhaps this was inevitable." We watched until the setting sun painted the smoke column in shades of orange and red, a beautiful apocalypse on the horizon. Then we returned to the cellar, to Maria and the children, to our small pocket of humanity, holding out against the incomprehensible. As night fell, Wright's monitoring equipment detected increased activity, more craft arriving, energy signatures fluctuating across the frequency spectrum, communication pulses growing in intensity and complexity. "The invasion is accelerating," he observed, making notes in his ever-present notebook. "What we witnessed today was merely the establishment phase. Tomorrow will bring expansion." "Will they come here?" Maria asked, the question we were all thinking. "Eventually, yes. They appear to be working outward from population centers in a systematic pattern. But rural areas are lower priority. We have time. Not much, perhaps, but some." I thought about my life just 12 hours earlier, picking up fares, complaining about tips, worrying about my ex-wife's new boyfriend and whether my daughter's college tuition payment would clear. Now here I was, huddled in a stranger's root cellar, witnessing the end of the world as we knew it. "You know what's strange?" I said to no one in particular. "In all those alien invasion movies, it's always the soldiers or the scientists or the politicians who matter. Never would have thought a taxi driver would be one of the survivors." Wright looked up from his notes. "That's where those narratives get it wrong, Mr. Harding. Survival isn't about inherent importance or specialized training. It's about adaptability, resourcefulness, and timing. You had all three today." I nodded, thinking about the countless small decisions that had led us here. If I hadn't taken Omar's shift, if I hadn't picked up Wright at the train station, if we hadn't found Maria and her children, or discovered the survival store, or located the gap in the perimeter barrier. 1,000 coin flips, all coming up heads. Just before midnight, as the others slept in makeshift beds amongst the food stores, I climbed up to the cabin one last time. The night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were in the city. Among them, new lights moved, alien craft patrolling, establishing their dominion over a world that had been exclusively ours just one day ago. In the distance, Providence glowed with unnatural light, the mothership now a permanent fixture in its skyline. Beyond it, I knew other cities were experiencing the same transformation. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. The world was changing irrevocably, becoming something we had no reference point to understand. Yet here we were, still breathing, still thinking, still human. I am Dexter Harding, a taxi driver from Providence, Rhode Island, and I survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new discoveries. But for now, in this moment, survival was enough.